everybody. You know you're in for a treat when you hear that music because it's time for another edition of the Rec Poker Podcast. If you don't know what Rec Poker is, we are a free community of online and in real life poker lovers. We love learning about poker. We love learning together. We love playing poker and stealing each other's chips. And it's free to join. Go to rec.poker and sign up for free today. I'd love to thank our sponsors, website AMP and Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. And I just got to tell you, I've got the best job in the world. I get to hang out here every week and talk to these wizards about poker. I think I mentioned my name's Jim Reed. I'm Bluff Sterini in the home game. You can find out more about me by going to rec.poker/crew, because that's where you can find out about everybody on the Wrecking Crew, like all these wizards here. So alphabetically by first name, introduce yourself, wizards.
I'm Chris Jones. Somehow I always get to go first. We need to find an Alfred or Abraham. But anyway, I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 on PokerStars.
And I'm John Somsky. I'm Poker Geek MN everywhere.
And I'm Keith Brandt, and I am Monkey System everywhere.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm Fergie56 in the home game and PatVet33 everywhere else.
And I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Rapman50 just about everywhere.
Somehow I always get to go last. I'm Taylor Moss. On Twitter, you can find me at Taylor_Moss, or in the Rec Poker home game, I'm Gopher Boy TJM.
So we need a Zeke and an Abraham. All right. I think we can zero in. We can zero in on those targets. So every week we get a chance to play. Well, there's a nightly home game. We got 10 home games a week going on here, thanks to John Somsky. But every week on Monday night, while we're playing, trying to steal each other's chips, we also take a post from the Rec Poker forums and talk about it here on the show. This week, the post is actually from none other than website Mark Pershan, who is the guru behind website AMP. But he couldn't be here tonight, so we're introducing our friend Eric Anderson. Some of our listeners might know Eric or have heard his name mentioned. He's a prolific poster in the forums, and he's got a great head for Poker Tracker 4. Eric, thank you for joining the show tonight.
Glad to be here. You can find me. I'm E. Anderson 85 in the home game right now.
There you go. And look out, folks. He's going to come and steal your chips. Then he's going to write up a filter for you in Poker Tracker 4 and tell you how he did it. So that's Eric. I'm looking forward to getting some insight from him tonight as well. So this post, left by, like I say, our own Mark Pershan, website Mark, is called Aggression with Equity. This is from Humble Brag. He recently played the 140 daily at Aria. So Mark's living his best life. And this was the most impactful hand he played. We're just past the first break, have about 30K, down to about 30 of the 48 entries remain. And people are starting to splash around less and are making more deliberate moves. The blinds are 500, 1,000. So we've got about 30 big blinds, and there's a big blind ante. The villain hasn't deviated noticeably from what I believe to be an average player at this level, except he's made a couple light calls because he's, quote, wanted to double up or re-enter. We know those players. Some of us are those players. That's okay. They know how to have a fun time too. And Mark says that his image is pretty tag, playing about 15% VPIP, almost zero limps, few calls, haven't shown any big bluffs, but did give up on a missed draw in a hand about an hour ago. So pre-flop, villain's under the gun +1, opens to 3,000. Off a 22 big blind stack, opens to 3x. So that I'd like to know if 3x was the standard opening size at the table, because that's pretty big open raise for a 22 big blind stack, but we're not sure about that. Folds around to Mark on the button, holding the ace of spades, queen of diamonds, and about 30 big blinds. He says he sometimes 3-bet, sometimes call. This time he calls. Everyone else gets out of the way. We get to the flop. King of spades, queen of spades, jack of spades. Again, we're holding the ace of spades and the queen of diamonds. We flop second pair top kicker, redraw to the flush draw, to the straight flush, the royal flush rather. And we're feeling pretty good about our flop, I think. He says, I flop second pair top kicker, the nut straight draw, and the royal flush draw. Nice. And then he puts villain on a range. I'll share the range here and then we can talk. Mark figures the range is something like 9s plus, ace 10 suited plus, king queen suited, ace queen off plus, and that's what he has to say about that. Villain C bets 5K into the 8.5K pot. And again, that feels like that's not a small bet on a board like that you could probably leverage a lot of folds with a smaller bet. So the flop decision that Mark's talking about here is that they've bet 60% pot on a very scary board. They've already put about a third of their stack in, and it leaves very few bluffs in their range. He feels like he's got too much of the board to fold. Calling seems crazy. He ends up shoving. So let's talk, before we get to the results, let's just talk a little bit about the kind of factors we're going to be thinking about here. First of all, Mark, great detailed post here. I love all the information that we're getting. And folks, we do the audio podcast here. There's a video component to it as well on YouTube. It's free, but you really got to go see the forum posts themselves. It's all laid out there really beautifully, and you can get a lot more out of it when you're actually looking at the breakdown. So Taylor, you were the first person to respond to this post in the... Oh, Kim.
Can we just talk about pre-flop first?
Sure.
Like, can we, instead of jumping right into the meat and potatoes of the hand? Can we just sort of talk about the fact that this is a very large raise from an under the gun +1 player from a 22 big blind stack?
Yeah.
And what our options are with ace queen offsuit when we have them covered on the button. I just think that it's worth discussing, because I think that it's not just cut and dried that we just call here.
That's a great point. Yeah. So Mark does say he does have a mixed strategy there. But we did kind of just gloss right over that, didn't we? Ace queen offsuit's usually a pretty good 3-betting hand. And you're getting the 22 big blinds effective is getting to that point where do you have a 3-bet size that's not all in? Probably not to a 3 big blind open, right? Rob, I see you shaking your head. What are you thinking?
Well, yeah, I'm looking at the chips. There's probably 500 and 1,000 chips out there. So he could have gone 2,500, but so 3,000 is just, one extra chip more than that. So I think if you look at the chip content of the chips that are available for him to raise, it would have either been 2,500 or 3,000. Couldn't have been, or he actually could have gone just 2,000. Which is probably what I would have done at a 22 big blind stack. Mm-hmm. So does this indicate that he has a big hand with, making it 3,000 to Kim's point? And then the only other thing I would say is ace queen offsuit. You never lose your stack with ace queen offsuit. And I think to my mind, it's never a call. It's either a 3-bet or a fold. And if I'm going to 3-bet here with these stack sizes, it's all in. That's all I'm going to say.
I think just to clarify Rob's point, when he said you never lose your stack with ace queen offsuit, he means you should never lose your stack with ace queen offsuit. Not that it is impossible.
No.
To do. I know from experience.
To me, this is one of those situations in live poker where we really need to have a good understanding of how this villain plays. Like if this person is entering a lot of pots and they're always entering for 3 times the big blind, then I think we have options, definitely have options here of everything's an option. To me, fold, raise, call, and all in are all options we can make in this spot. And I think that a lot of it depends on what our observance, how we've observed this villain to play in the past. If they're normally only opening 2 or 2.2, a lot of people squeak that up a little higher when they have a really premium hand, and you got to be really, your little antenna should be going up when that happens. I've seen even pros do that, like where they just squeak it up a little higher, So I think that if they're opening 3 big blinds from a 22 big blind stack, they're committed to this hand. They're pretty much already committed to this hand. So I don't even mind folding here if this is unusual for this villain. Like Rob said, the call is difficult because we're sort of in no man's land, but folding is probably down here, then there's call, and then sometimes we should raise, and then maybe sometimes we go all in. If this is a villain that's always opening 3 times and they're being very active, I don't mind the all in either. But like to Rob's point, to raise and not go all in is a tough with these when they've opened to 3 big blinds and we're trying to find an appropriate size because we're sort of committing ourselves to their stack.
Yeah, Chris.
I mean, I like, I mean, especially because we're maybe like it's an under the gun open, whether this is their typical size or not. And there's this signal that this is sort of a big, but we have a decent hand. Even if they have a big hand, it's not necessarily just aces, right? They can have kings, queens, jacks, all these kinds of hands that, and we've got a decent holding. And the beauty of this and why I would advocate for a call is we're on the button. And so let's C3. We can still get away from this. We're not losing that much. But I would have trouble folding this specifically because we're on the button, because that's a beautiful hand to have on the button. You know, you can't, you can really sort of see how it's going, you know, post flop. You don't have to lose your whole stack. I don't think we're committed to this pot by calling here.
Yeah, I think position is like the main thing for me when I'm looking about this hand. And I think you can, like, at least in my mind, if you change just a few things about position, it makes me want to swing a different way in terms of essentially like all 4 options that like Kim was talking about. If you say, hey, this guy's under the gun and we're right next to him after doing that, then a fold becomes a much more probable option to me. Given where we're at, I don't think I'm ever folding here, but at least it becomes somewhat of an option. If you instead make the opponent's position right next to us, say they're in the cutoff, and then they open to this, and then we're on the button, I kind of like a small 3-bet there. Their range is really wide. A small 3-bet entices them to call. It makes it, you know, really good for us. If you move our position to the small blind instead of the button, then I feel like calling is pretty atrocious and you should be either folding or jamming. So like you change one small thing and then like I'm like differing on what my preferred option is. But given that they're under the gun, they have a pretty strong range for that open, and we're on the button, so we've kind of got that spot of absolute position. I like the call. Again, so many things could change to make me want to say something else. Even, you know, if you give us ace queen suited, then maybe I'm more inclined to 3-bet. But kind of just one of those weird spots where we're so close to deviating and making some sort of different decision. But I personally like calling here, reassessing on the flop, and making decisions then.
Yeah, Eric, you're muted, but please unmute. Jump right in, man.
Well, I like calling too, but the first question you want to ask when you want to call from the button is how often are the blinds going to 3-bet when this happens?
Mm-hmm.
So you still have to pay attention to who's behind you and who's left to act.
Yeah, I love that. Always look left, right? Because if they're going to be aggressive players, you're just making that pot even more tempting when you come along like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he doesn't say how long he had been at this table, but I don't know if he would have had a chance to get that kind of information. But I love that. That's a great thing to be thinking about. Whether and especially with cusp hands like this, where you're not sure exactly which is the right way to play it. So I like Mark's comment in here. He says, "I don't think I've ever hit a flop so hard, and also felt like I'm not good." Majority of the time. It's a great dynamic because he's got the ace of spades on the king of spades, queen of spades, jack of spades flop, right? So that's a pretty sweet place to be. But the opponent's range is kind of uncapped. And I'll be honest with you, the sizing is kind of telling me that this player thinks that they have a strong hand. 3x off a 22 big blind stack. I play online more than live, so maybe I'm projecting a little bit, but I like the games I play in, people are opening smaller off a 22 big blind stack. And a board like this, you don't need a big C bet. You don't need a C bet more than half pot to get people to go away, stack size or not. So it does feel like, again, it's a really strong, or at least they feel like it's strong. So does that influence our decision? And maybe the gang here can help me think about this. When I'm playing in real time, how do I like apply that sense that I'm getting from them to my game? Because it's hard for me to like visualize my entire range and say, oh, okay, well, I'll tighten up this part here because I think they're tighter. Taylor, I don't know if that's what you were going to talk about or something else, but
yeah, I mean, I was going to kind of just talk to the flop situation, because the flop is a weird situation, right? Like, how often do you get 3 to a straight flush out there and have those all be Broadway cards?
Mm-hmm.
It does really weird things to range dynamics when we talk about this. Mark, put in there kind of a perceived range of what he assumed our opponent to have. But the thing is, like, based off all those ranges, or, what most people would say for ranges, our opponent never has a flush or even a flush draw here, which is the nuts in this spot, is the flush and the flush draw, which obviously that's due to us holding the ace of spades and having the absolute key blocker in this hand. But when that happens, we actually have the nut advantage, right? There's range advantage, there's nut advantage. He's got a decent amount of really strong hands in his range, but we have all the nut potential. And the thing is, we don't have the nuts, we have the nut draw, but we can really make informed decisions about what they're doing with their hand when we can take the nuts out of their potential hands. So if we know that, then it's, what else are they betting with? Obviously, jacks, queens, and kings all in their range. Ace, king in their range. King, queen in their range. King, jack suited potentially in their range. And aces in their range. All strong hands that, could get to this spot and instinctively bet out. Not saying they should be betting in all those spots, but like all those hands could be betting out there. And the thing about where we're at against that is we're behind all those. We probably have decent equity, but we're behind all those hands. So now we're in that weird spot of, okay, we could represent the nuts. We do have the nut to draw. Now, how do we approach? We have equity. We know we have equity. We don't know exactly how much. We don't know exactly what our outs would be for said equity. But how do we approach this? And I think that's what makes this such an interesting hand and a thing to think about is how does it play out with those range dynamics? And I mean, I don't think our opponent should be betting that often here. And when they do, I don't like the big bet sizing, especially when they don't have the nuts or the nut blocker. And that's what we see here. So again, it kind of puts a theory into a cage as well. So I'll pause there and let someone else talk. But I think just the flop dynamics and what's going on is a really interesting part of this hand.
It really is. And I would really like to see this hand and how it would have played out at 100 to 200 big blinds deep rather than short, because when we have this much equity and we're playing for this short a stack, we're never going to fold our equity. And as is our opponent, if they have a lot of equity in this hand, they are never going to fold their equity either. So that comes to down to the points of shoving or whatever, and shoving, calling, whatever. It would be way more interesting if we were much, much deeper in this hand to see how the dynamics would have played out.
Yeah, totally agree. And it is interesting. Taylor's point about card removal is really crucial here, because you don't get that many situations where you can say for certainty that your opponent does not have the ace, king, queen, or jack of the suit that's out there. So when the 10 of spades is the highest spade available, and you think about all the other hands that your opponent would open from early position, and you take out all the spade flush draws that they're going to have there, it is a lot of it's going to be a lot of like two pair or two pair hands in spots like this, and we don't get an opportunity to have that kind of certainty about the cards that are not in our opponent's range very often. So that's a cool spot. So it sounds like we feel like the opponent kind of overplayed this hand a little bit by making that big flop bet with the aces. Because it doesn't like follow the story, in the way that we're used to these kind of bet sizes making sense.
Did you just spoil the hand, Jim? I don't think we ever said what the opponent had at this point.
Yeah,
cut that from the recording.
Spoiler alert. We introduced some spoilers in the forums this week too. So now people
Perfect
can go
time to
in
talk
and
about that.
that's why I did it on purpose, Taylor. That was all part of our produced session here that we do. Yeah.
But even before knowing what his hand is, I think we also understand that on this type of a flop, you don't expect to see that kind of a bet.
Right.
Especially especially if you're holding the ace of spades. What is he representing, with that bet? I mean, I don't think I make a 60% pot bet on that type of flop, no matter what my two cards are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Chris?
But I do think there are players who make these, they're like they're almost just frustration bets where it's just like they had a super premium hand. It's usually you see them with like aces or kings and something comes and then they still are like, but this was mine. This was mine and this is not fair. And, they make a big bet here because they want to take it down. They shouldn't be doing that. But I think that this is if I was in this hand, this would be a one of the even without the spoiler, this would be one of those like, okay, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm up against here. I don't know. So
yeah, those players don't do that with pocket tens here either.
Right.
That's not like, they're not like, it's like, it really does. I've done this with aces myself. Literally not on this, not with all Broadway, but I've been like, oh, I'm going to get these aces to the flop. And then it comes like 8, 9, 10 hearts. And like, no, this was my hand. I was going to win this hand. I will win it now with this large bet. That don't try that at home, folks. Keith?
Yeah, I was just thinking that size of flop bet, that size C bet, just what story is that telling me?
Yeah,
I don't understand it. With his stack size, why isn't he just jamming if he likes it? He's trying to get value. Is he really going to be able to bluff us out of the hand at this point with this stack size? I would be confused, and I would have to either jam or call myself. Probably jam over the top of him, just because I don't see what he's got. And even if I don't see what he's got, I know he doesn't have a hand that beats mine if I hit. We got great equity here. It's just, to me, it's pretty cut and dried here.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean this literally. Like when I get confused, I often find that jamming is like my go-to. When it's like, let's see. Let's see how this is going to work out. I would be very tempted to jam here because I know he can't have a spade in his hand higher than a 10. That would make me inclined to jam here. And the only thing I would do differently, Mark, I would arrange for a spade to come on the turn or the river. And I think that's really the only difference. I mean, that's the only mistake I noticed in the hand history was just a little just poor deck read there. Yeah, Chris?
Can I make the counterpoint?
Yeah.
Because I think this is something that I've been really trying to work on as well myself. And like I still find myself in spots, not this exact spot, but spots like this. And I'm always tempted to jam, but I'm always trying to check myself a little bit. And like, because I just feel like we have position. That was one of the reasons why we called with ace queen at the very beginning of this hand. And I feel like there are hands that we could be ahead. I mean, if we're jamming here, right, I don't think there's no better hand that is folding to our jam, right? I mean, does
like a red ace or a red
jack,
king, rather?
Maybe queen jack or something like that might fold or something like that. But like, I don't think there are many better hands that are folding to our jam. And so then what we're trying to do is get a worse hand to call us. And the only one that I can think of is maybe like tens with the 10 of spades might call us or something.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I like calling here. I like calling and seeing how this turn develops, seeing how this opponent who's put a large portion of their stack reacts. We get to see both the card and see how they react to the turn before we commit, whatever it is, 15 more big blinds to this, where we're likely behind.
I
Chris-
totally agree. I like a call here as well, because for one, it might earn us a free river. If we call here, it might go check on a blank turn. And then if either that or the villain's shoving, and we can choose to shut down on the turn with just a pair of queens.
He's basically going to have around a pot size bet left on the turn, I think, around there. So that would be the decision point. So as long as we kind of know that that's the decision we're going to have to make on the turn or on the river, then I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I am also in camp call, reevaluate. We're in position. This is what we want to do. If we were flipped and we were out of position, I think jamming is good here, because then we don't really want to be in spots where we're checking to our opponent and allowing them to, see us showing signs of weakness. But here, like Kim said, it feels like they're going to keep betting, but we don't know that for sure. They could have, get scared by something and check a turn card, giving us a free opportunity to see two cards for the price here. So I think that's ultimately like where I line up on this. And we're in a spot where I feel like everyone can like agree with this statement, though, that like on this flop, we know a couple things. One, we have equity and probably some decent equity. And two, we are currently behind in the hand. Yeah. And those two things make it really weird for me to like want to jam here, because then I'm jamming as a bluff, right? It's a semi-bluff jam. And everything that we've talked about is like our opponent's got some sort of value. They didn't like the hand and they want to like just try and win it here, and giving them an option to do that. So I'm in just call and evaluate. The one thing that I would do here is this is a live tournament. I'm guaranteeing our opponent bet really quickly on this flop. I am going to slow down and think and force my opponent to think about the board and what's going on out there, and then call. Because if I call quick, they could just instinctively jam, and that's not really what I want to be seeing. I want them to understand the board texture, what's out there, get them to start like, having that like little bit of heartburn, like, oh no,
what did I just do?
What is going on here? So I'd go into a little bit of like live showmanship and like slow down a bit. Like, I'm not calling super quick. I am going to let them think about this board and then call. So
I love that. Yeah, Chris?
No, I love that too. Taylor's words of wisdom. Give your opponents heartburn in moments you don't want them to snap call you.
That's right. Yeah. That's like Kim was telling us a few weeks ago about that Ryan LaPlante tip, right? See if their breathing changes after 2 minutes. And then that's another way to give them that time. Give them that time to start giving you some tells. I love that. Use that time bank. And you should always use your time bank, folks. Online or live, no snap decisions. Take your hand off the mouse, think it through, then make an intentional, excellent poker decision. All right. Well, I guess I already blew the spoiler. So they did have aces and they tank called, and Mark did not sacrifice a bull earlier in the day. And so no spade came on the turn or the river, unfortunately. And he lost several chips, but did not go out of the tournament, and went on to double up. And I'm not sure how he actually did at the end of it, but I know he had a lot of fun. So thank you, Mark, for posting that in the forums. And I also want to thank all these great responses. So Taylor Moss, Sir Gas Leak, who has been posting more and more, and that's great to see them a dedicated forum poster. Epictetus, who some of our listeners might be familiar with, who we did a forum post from him a few weeks ago. 5x5, our own Chris Jones, and Eric Anderson here, who shared a sympathetic note about drawing to the Royal Flush. So the last question for the group. So when you're drawing to a Royal Flush, are you stickier than when you're than the EV would imply, than the equity would imply? Is there something in your minds when the Royal's on the table that's like, I know I shouldn't call, but I just want to see if I'm going to hit the Royal Flush. Keith?
It's glory equity.
Yeah.
Makes it more worth the call.
That's true. We talk about like life EV too, right? Yeah, Rob?
Well, I'm just saying it's a gut shot to the Royal.
Yes.
If it was an open-ended to the Royal, that might be a little different story. But it's a gut shot to the Royal. Come on, all it is a gut shot, straight flush draw. So I think most of your equity is on the flush draw itself. I mean, obviously. Now I can say that because I've never ever had a Royal flush. So in all the poker I've ever played, I've never had one. So I don't get that excited because I've never seen one.
As far as you're concerned, they might not even exist. They exist only in the mind.
They don't even exist.
Right on. Well, we exist here at Rec Poker because of our wonderful sponsors, including Website Mark himself at Website Amp, and of course our friends at Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. So thank you to Keith, John, Rob, Kim, Eric, Taylor, and Chris, Steve Fredland, and all you listeners. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.